Okay, hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about success tips for beginning educators, and this is a presentation by Mackenzie Brown and Tabitha Martin. So, what are we going to be talking about? We're going to give you 4 tips for beginning educators. We're going to talk about instruction as it relates to theories and tips, motivation as it relates to theories and tips, assessment as it relates to theories and tips, mindfulness across content areas, teaching strategies and interventions, core messages, and we're each going to talk about our own educational practices and then a conclusion.
The 4 success tips we have for you all are creating an award system, learning about your students and their interest, utilize assessments, and plan ahead. Rewards can be used as motivation to all students. Knowing your students helps build bonds and trust throughout the year. Learning their interest will keep them engaged and focused throughout the day. The best way to judge students or patient growth is through assessments, and not many good lessons or therapy can come on a whim, so it's important to plan ahead.
So, now we're going to talk about instruction and how it relates to the different theories we've been learning about in class. So, first, what is instruction? Instruction is basically just the way that you teach and how you present your information to your students. So there's 4 different teaching styles or 4 styles of instruction. Each style reflects on how you may teach and how your students will learn. It also might need to be adjusted based on the needs of your students and how they are learning. So the first one is authoritarian. So this basically means the teacher has complete control over the classroom. Students are not involved in making decisions really. There's a clear set of rules and expectations. This would probably work better in classrooms with behavior issues or students who just need more structure. The next one is authoritative. So this is a little less than authoritarian. So the teacher still has most control of the class, but there's some room for student discussion and work. And while the students have more freedom, the teacher sets clear guidelines to prevent chaos in the freedom. They may also work together with the students to come up with classroom rules, so that way the students are still involved in that. This would probably work best for students who need some structure but can be trusted independently at least a little bit. So, next one is permissive. So, this is basically there's low levels of teacher control. The students get a lot more freedom, but it can become a little disorderly. Specifically with permissive, there's not a lot of hands on involvement from the teacher. The teacher doesn't really get to know the students on a personal basis, type thing. They don't build a good relationship with their students, and there's not many consequences for behavior because there's no strict defined rules. I would only think this would work well for students who are extremely independent and don't need any accountability, which is very, very rare. This would not be the preferred teaching style due to not building the relationships with the students and not laying any rules or anything like that. And the last one is indulgent. So this is kind of similar, except that the teacher is more involved with the students. So there's still a lot of freedom in the classroom, but the teacher actually cares about building relationships with the students. Even though there might be a lack of order, the teacher is often well liked. I think this would work good for students who don't need a lot of instruction but could still use some support. Okay, so next we're talking about preventative classroom management strategies. So this is a huge part of instruction. Knowing how to prevent bad behaviors from starting and knowing how to handle them when they do start is a huge part of it. So when you're building your instruction or your lesson, you need to think about the students you have in your class, what issues might arise, and how to prevent it. And going right along with the last thing, when issues arise in the classroom or conflicts of any sort, it's the teacher's job to be able to appropriately handle them. So, knowing your students, knowing how they act, you need to think about what might happen and how you could fix it. Okay, so 2 of the tips I thought really related to instruction were utilizing assessments and planning ahead. So the first one, utilizing assessments, these can help lead and shape your instruction. So administering an assessment at the start of like the school year or the start of your therapy can give you like a baseline for where you need to begin teaching and where the students might struggle and need a little extra support. whereas doing these like in the middle of the year or the end of the year may show you how well what you're doing is sticking with the student or where they're still needing support or where they're still struggling. Planning ahead is also super important because all good instruction is thought out and planned according to the students and their needs. Trying to come up with something last minute will not benefit the learning of the child, and that's our whole goal here is to help them learn the best that they can.
Student motivation is a vital part of the learning process because it is an important source of diversity, ability, and developmental readiness. This being said, the two theories we are going to cover are motives as behavior and motives as interests. Motives as behavior follows operant conditioning, a theory associated with B.F. Skinner. This theory involves concepts such as positive and negative reinforcement, punishment, and extinction. Positive reinforcement increases the likelihood of a behavior by introducing a stimulus to the situation. Negative reinforcement increases the likelihood of a behavior by removing a stimulus from the situation. Punishment decreases the likelihood of a behavior by introducing a stimulus such as timeout to a situation. And extinction is the complete removal of a reinforcer such as a sticker or piece of candy to get to a desired behavior. Motives as interests take into account personal and situational interest. Personal interests are individual to the student. These are relatively personal and expressed in a variety of situations. Situational interests are triggered temporarily by features of a situation, whether these be sights, sounds, or words. No matter how your students may be motivated, it is important to remember that there is no right or wrong way to motivate them. The two tips I felt related to motivation are creating an award system and learning your students' interest. Creating an award system allows you to motivate your students through positive reinforcement. Your students will be motivated to do their work because they will receive a sticker, praise, or a prize from the treasure box. Learning your students' interest will inform you on the best way to motivate your students because, as we learned from the last slide, each student is motivated differently, whether this be through personal or situational interests.
Okay, and two theories I wanted to talk about that revolved around assessments were assessments for learning versus assessments of learning, and formal versus informal assessments. So, to start off, assessments for learning are assessments that are meant to support and better understand how well the students are understanding the content. This allows teachers to adjust the way they're teaching to meet the needs of the students. So, this is more of just let's see how they're doing, how we can help them, whereas assessments of learning are like a gauge of how well the students are retaining the information. It's more of a number gauge, um, more of a standardized score type thing. So, informal assessments involve observing students and creating a basis for how you think they're doing based off of just what you're seeing. So, I know specifically in speech therapy, this is a big thing where you'll just play with the kid and watch how they interact with you and just get a true example of how they're actually doing. And I'm sure this is done often in the education field as well. Where formal assessments, those can be like quizzes or tests that are being taken. It just provides you with a numerical grade, and it gives you a way to score your students on par with all the other students their age. So it gives you a standardized score of how they're doing.
I felt as if three of our four success tips relate to assessment. These include learning about your students and their interests, utilizing assessment, and planning ahead. Learning about your students and their interests will help you to learn the best way to assess, measure, and evaluate an individual or the whole class. Utilizing assessments is, of course, the whole point of assessment. With that being said, it's important to know the types of assessments and the 5 essential steps in assessment for learning. These 5 steps include having clear instructional goals and communicating them to students, selecting appropriate assessment techniques, using assessment to enhance motivation and confidence, adjusting instruction based on information, and communicating with parents and guardians. The two kinds of assessment we are going to cover are informal and formal assessment. Informal assessment is spontaneous observations of students' behavior, while formal assessments are pre planned to gather data from students. When planning ahead, assessments will help you to gain information about student progress and behaviors which can inform you on the best way to progress and prepare for your next lesson to enhance student performance.
Okay, so now we're going to be talking about mindfulness across content areas. So there's a few main things that I want to talk about. So the first thing to be mindful of is the background of your students. So it's important to consider each student's background and culture when creating lessons or just interacting with them. As a teacher, you never want to overstep regarding any cultural or religious beliefs or anything like that. It's important to just be mindful of what each student believes and not cross a line there. The next thing you want to think about is each student's cognitive abilities. And so basically, each student has a different level of cognitive abilities, especially depending on the population you're working with. So you just need to make note of the things that you're teaching them and if they're going to be able to take in that information and learn the way that they deserve to be. The next one is their strengths and weaknesses. So each child has certain strengths and certain weaknesses. So as a teacher, um, or an SLP or just an education professional, it's important to let them utilize their strengths while also trying to help them build upon their weaknesses.
Now, I would like to go over a couple teaching strategies and intervention you may use within your classroom. I'm going to go over teacher directed and learner directed instructional strategies. Teacher directed strategies consist of expository instruction, which involves information being presented in the same form students are expected to learn. This can be through lectures and textbooks, presentations, or visual aids. Asking questions and giving feedback are both lower level questions that check for basic understanding and recall, and higher level questions that encourage elaborations and complex cognitive processes such as problem solving and critical thinking. Learner directed strategies consist of conductive reciprocal teaching sessions to promote effective metacognitive strategies such as summarizing, questioning, clarifying, and predicting during reading and listening activities. Conducting discovery and inquiry activities, which encourages students to derive information for themselves with goals of helping the students acquire more effective reasoning processes. It is important that you, as an educator, never gives up on yourself or your students. Remember why you began your career, whether this be wanting to make a difference, the love of education, or etc. Keeping these four success tips, creating an award system, getting to know your students and their interests, utilizing assessments, and planning ahead will remind you of how to continue and grow within your career. I would like to take a minute to tell you about my own educational practice as a current preschool teacher. Currently, I use all four of our success tips within my classroom. In the beginning, I made a point to get to know my students and their interests so that I could build strong bonds with them and so they would enjoy coming to school every day. Getting to know my students helped me to create an award system that motivates them to continue to work hard. My students love stickers and lollipops, so anytime they complete an assignment neatly or listen to directions throughout the duration of the day, they receive one of these options before they go home. Planning ahead and utilizing assessments go hand in hand. I use informal assessments with my students to gain information about where they are developmentally so I know how to best prepare my next lesson to enhance my students' performance.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about our four tips and relate them to my own practice and how I'm going to use them. So, in my own personal practice as an SLP, I will use pretty much all of these every single day. So, the first one, assessments, they're a huge part of being an SLP. It gives you a basis to know where to start therapy, and it tells you how well a client is doing with the therapy. I also will need to know my patients pretty well to be able to build strong relationships with them, and so that they'll be comfortable enough to work with me and actually succeed in their therapy with me. Creating an award system is also something that's really important to SLPs too, especially working with younger kids. I think this could be good to be like, oh, if you do this, then you'll get a treat, or oh, if you complete this session, then you'll get a lollipop, or something like that. Planning ahead is probably one of the most important things. Um, it's to ensure that you're creating a good and efficient therapy plan that the patient will enjoy, but also will benefit them and will get the therapy done that's supposed to be getting done. All right, so just a quick conclusion. We mentioned four tips for success, which were create an award system, learn about your students and their interests, utilize assessments, and plan ahead. And all of these are important. So, the importance of assessments, they're important to gauge a baseline for instruction and to gauge how well the students are progressing. These can be formal or informal. Importance of motivation. It's always important to encourage and motivate your students to keep trying and keep pushing themselves even when they don't want to. You don't know what they have going on in their life, you might be their only support system. The importance of instruction. It's really important you consider all of your students individually and create lessons and instructions that will help them learn the best that they can. And the last thing I want to touch on is mindfulness. It's just important to be mindful of all cultures and backgrounds of all students. This will help you understand them and make sure you don't cross any lines with your teaching. So, thanks for watching.